Always the cloud. All right, I think we're recording. So perfect. Well, let's get ready for our speakers. So I've got a little spiel here, Tyler, to introduce you. So Tyler has joined us. He's had an amazing career in public accounting. Started his career in San Francisco with some Fortune 500 companies before he returned home to Utah back in 2004, where he supported companies in the local area through Tanner, which I think is what a lot of you maybe know Tyler through. And most recently, back in 2018, he joined some friends in co-founding and supporting in the role of CFO at Every, a full-service payroll platform that provides employers with innovative tools that haven't existed in the market until now. Our platform provides employers with the ability to let their employees select their personal pay preference rather than relying on the popular archaic pay cycle that isn't fulfilling employees' needs anymore. I actually had the distinct pleasure of working with Tyler at Every. And so with that, I'll hand it over to him and let him take it away, and we'll have some Q&A at the end.
Sure, thanks. It was a great commercial too, by the way, Michaela. That was great. Yeah.
I stole it from a couple of things, but I workshopped it a little bit.
No, it is funny to actually go from a partner to CPA firm to an entrepreneur. Very, very different sides of the spectrum in terms of risk tolerance. I will say lots of less sleep now than I had before. I do wish I had Nick's view though. Nick Miller at the top of the screen on my screen. He's like got the place to be right there.
I agree.
Nonetheless,
Nick wins background of the day.
Right. And it's a real background too. It's not even a virtual beach.
Lucky. Well, the topic that I've been asked to kind of really talk through and discuss is customer acquisition costs. And I'll share my screen in a minute here. But I think of this, especially at an early stage company, 100% has to be, I would say, dialed in air quotes, because in the absence of data, it's almost impossible to guess or come up with a formulaic approach to come up with what your customer acquisition cost is. But it's absolutely critical to the lifeblood of a company, because it frankly tells you whether or not you're going to be able to be profitable or not. And so I spend a lot of time, as you can imagine, as the CFO and in our GTM strategy to figure out, okay, what can we actually spend to get a customer? And so with that framing, everybody does this a little bit differently. But the basic premise, at least I want to reiterate here, is as long as you're consistently applying the same metric over time, it's going to give you the outcome that you should be looking at. Instead of trying to fumble with the ball over and over and over again, it's just not worth it. And so what we've taken here at Every and previous companies that I've consulted with is really just take the approach that you think works and then refine it over time. So as I share my screen here, you'll see, I'm going to show you a little bit from our, hopefully you can see this screen right here. Yes, no, maybe so.
Yep, we got you.
Got it.
Perfect. So what you'll see here is really, I'll go into our Every model, frankly, in a second, but these are the things that we should consider. So obviously you're thinking through, okay, what does it cost us to acquire that customer? What are the inputs that have to be included in that effort? Every business and every customer that I've been looking at and have looked at and served does it differently. Some use variable spend as a metric in terms of ad spend. Some don't. Some use hard and direct payroll costs, less some component of it. Others do not. And so as I mentioned before, just do what is right for your business here. Here's some general information that I'm happy to share out. I put it on a screen just because I always have these summaries in terms of my financial models to make sure that I at least have a baseline and my kind of source of truth, as I call it, on how I look at different types of definitions inside of our business, especially where it comes to what matters to me and what can I tell the board as being my core metrics. I formulate them the way I want, and then I tell the board, this is how I've measured them. So you'll notice here, in terms of your CAC costs obviously have to be, and CAC being kind of the acronym for customer acquisition cost, the quicker the payback period, the better off you are as a company. And so again, if you're spending $2,000 to obtain a customer that's only going to give you an ROI of $2,000, it's like trying to sell a product that gives you no margin. It's the exact same experience, except in software. And so when I talk through these here, you'll notice this is a calculation as most people understand. And I just made it in a fun little image just to say, okay, what are my cost of sales in manufacturing terms? Because I think manufacturing, I'm a product guy, first and foremost. Your direct costs are these cost of sales. So these are salaries, BDRs, AEs, subject matter experts, SMEs, and then an allocation of CS. Early stage companies, they may only have a BDR or an AE. They may not have, like we do not have a CS team, frankly, that we can reasonably allocate right now to CAC costs. Eventually we'll have to. Currently though, you shouldn't have to worry about it, depending on your stage here. And this is where Kyle, who's on the phone call here, I think as well, this is where he drives his experience inside of He has to control now an advertising or a variable spend budget that drives to an efficient marketing spend on a blended basis between cost of sales and cost of marketing to figure out how many new leads did we get, new customers, to be able to drive what is our true customer acquisition for that cohort. There's a whole lot of other nuances that we can talk through here, but I'll give you a little bit more insight as we look through maybe the next section when we look at payback period and how that is intertwined wholeheartedly with your CAC costs. And I'll just put on the screen here in case it's replayed again. But really, when you think of your CAC, you have to then immediately consider what is the lifetime value of that customer. Is that customer going to provide you $5,000 worth of revenue because you think they're going to pay $1,000 a year for 5 years? Or is that customer only going to be around for 2 years? And as a result, I'm only willing to incur certain CAC costs because I want my payback period to be a certain percentage of that. So it's very important to understand, what do you believe some of these metrics are going to be down here? Average revenue per account, your gross margin gives you this payback period. I will show you now a little bit from my sales model inside of to explain it a little bit further here. All right. So you'll notice here's my direct labor costs. My direct labor costs here are driven by the number of FTEs, full-time equivalents, based upon the different levels that we have. And so I'm being completely transparent with you and the number of employees we have in the sales team, which is cool, but it also gives you a practical experience here. So this is the direct cost on a monthly basis for us to have those sales folks out there hunting. At the same time, we have a variable ad spend budget that we're willing to spend of up to or approximately $30,000. What that does is gives us an all-in cost of $95,000. Then we say, okay, how many customers do we expect to get? How much revenue do we expect to receive during that same time period? I look at it as a 90-day lead time. So I'm generating my costs 3 months in advance of the leads actually falling. And so it's a waterfall that I start looking at. But you'll notice here, the CAC payback period, 26, 29, 15 months, it then normalizes over to what I believe is an expected amount for, or a reasonable amount for our customers here, or for our company here. And so I'm just checking the chat real quick. Perfect. Yeah, we can answer questions at the end. I'll be pretty brief, but we could dial in later here at the end.
We're running pretty good on time too, Tyler. So we've got some good runway there.
Awesome. And so then the question is, what is a general rule of thumb for your CAC payback period? If you know your direct costs, your salaries, and you have your variable costs for advertising, for content, for SEO, various other items, what should this number be? Well, there's benchmarks for that. And so I'll flip back over to here, and you'll notice here, general rule for startups is 12 months or less. And I can tell you, I've been doing due diligence for years and years and years. If you get a startup that is at 12 months or less and growing 100 to 200% a year, you will get their top valuation every single time. So your top valuation could be 40 times ARR or higher. If you're lower than that and your payback period is longer, it's going to be more difficult to potentially raise money. And the reason for that is because you're going to have more capital to obtain the growth rate that you want. My goal at Every is to get this payback period as quick as possible to 9 months. And at that point, we're reasonably spending enough on our variable ad spend as well as our fixed ad spend or fixed costs to enable our growth rate. And so since cash is the ultimate limiter on all SaaS company businesses, you're really trying to figure out, how do I squeeze more juice out of the turnip by reducing your payback period and increasing your average revenue per account. Now, if we go back again to here, you'll notice the sales model is driven, again, wholeheartedly by expectations. And when I go into the assumptions tabs here, you'll notice there's a lot of stuff in here that really does matter. And so when you start building out your model, considering your CAC costs, you have to figure out, what is your targets? What are you aiming for? What is that going to normalize over time? And then how do I measure it? And so because we're a payroll software platform, we stratify our population of customers into various buckets based upon probabilities. And those are the items that then allow me to determine which type of customers do I think I'm going to land, how much revenue do I believe we're going to obtain from them, and then as a result, how many sales folks do I need to hire in order to generate that demand. And if all of that information makes sense and has a proven track record over time, then and only then will you find an investor doing a Series B round, so to speak, that is really coming in just to juice the company and their metrics. And so since it's public that we've raised our A round, 100% this is critical to our company now, because getting ahead of our skis in terms of getting our payback period is too long, or not being aggressive enough by saying it's too short, stymies our growth. And so that's where the happy medium of 9 to 12 months on a CAC payback period is most appropriate. Maybe I'll pause there, because I know I was only supposed to take 10 or 15 minutes there, unless there's specific questions that I can answer here.
Got a few questions, Tyler. Thanks. This is awesome. One, are you willing to share this spreadsheet with people if it's
Sure.
redacted?
Yeah, sure. I'll just make it pretty, I'll take some of our Every stuff out, but you can have it and use it. No problem.
That would be amazing. So a couple of questions from Gary. One, if you're selling worldwide, like medical products, where would the regulatory costs and translations cost be captured in this model?
Yeah, so I would never put translation costs as a CAC cost ever. That's an operational expense because that's something that, frankly, you can't predict anywhere, and it's too variable from there. And so you're trying to essentially shoot a moving target with regards to that. In terms of regulatory items, I don't know that I would put that in a customer acquisition cost either. I would look at it as what does it cost me to land a new Johnson & Johnson or whoever you're selling to. It's not truly like what is the regulatory environment. That's a product-based cost that you're going to have to then recover over time, but it's not a customer acquisition cost.
Okay. I don't know if I'm going to just operationally, Michaela, is it okay if I just have the people who have questions ask the questions? I don't need
I love it. No, I don't think so. If there were people who just wanted to, I guess, maybe share their questions more privately or anything like that, then we can certainly do that. But if everyone's open, we've got about 15 more minutes of time. So I'd love to capitalize on the rest of our time with Q&A with Tyler.
Awesome. Phil Walker, do you want to just jump in there with your question then?
Sure. Thanks, Tyler, for doing this. This is super. So how do you see the relationship between the growth of the customer acquisition cost and the growth of revenue per customer, right? They're both important, but when you guys are actually looking for your next stage, how important is the growth of either of those? Like, is customer acquisition cost the payback time frame way more important than seeing a nice growth per customer increase?
Great question. And I would say 100%, the sooner I can get my ARPA, my average revenue per account, higher, the more I can spend to acquire more customers.
Okay.
The reason is because
you got more profit in there, a lot more profit. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No. So you're monitoring costs for acquiring the customers, but you're really trying to drive that revenue per customer. I mean, that's what you're trying to drive.
Yeah. In some industries, you can actually upsell.
Sure.
In ours, I don't know that necessarily we have, I'll call it like a path to increasing an average revenue per customer. There is a potential. But in most software companies, let's say you're buying Adobe CS suite. Well, that's a fixed cost. So you don't really have an ability to upsell that customer. You're just trying to say, okay, how do I most cheaply acquire that customer based upon an expected average dollar value across the entire customer base? If, for example, you're able to increase your average revenue, then great. Start dumping fuel on the fire, in my opinion.
Totally. Yeah. And I think even for companies that have limited product portfolios, there are ways to increase average revenue per customer. I mean, there's ways to package things together and kind of encourage companies to make decisions themselves about what options they want. I think there are ways to do that. In fact, I've seen ways to do that in companies that we've worked with that been able to help sort that out. So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Certainly. I can nerd out. Like, I'm a complete bean counter at heart. So I can go spreadsheet after spreadsheet. I just don't think it's super helpful.
Tyler, when you have this model and you're using it, after you figure out what these numbers are, what are your next steps for managing the teams and the different elements that build up to your CAC? Like, if you were to do this right now, what's the next step in terms of managing your team and saying, okay, what are the levers that we want to start turning or pulling?
Yeah. So outside of, once I have predictability, we talk a lot about predictability of every aspect of the business, whether it be to product development, to operations, or CS, or sales and marketing. It 100% drives on predictability. Once I know that I can hit my quotas, my sales quotas, based upon this direct labor and this variable spend, if I can do that profitably, then guess what? I have the coolest opportunity to say, okay, great. Once I have predictability, I can go raise $20 million and I can double my spend here and do a test run for 3 months and say, okay, I'm going to double my ad spend. It's going to be a 90-day experiment because I expect those leads to come through, we call them SAOs, sales accepted opportunities, all the way through conversion. to close deal. So after you have predictability, you create that test case, double down on this variable spend, and then see in 3 months if you get the tail that you think you will by doubling that effort. If you don't, then you probably made the wrong assumption. And so it's a test and iterate very, very quickly.
Tyler, you brought up a really interesting comment there about predictability. I think if you can predict the future, there's no need to control it, right?
Yep.
And that's an effectual reasoning concept, right? That framework of effectual versus causal reasoning. But when you hit that scale, do you have a number in mind at your business to flip from effectuation to causal, where you're more process focused and you don't have to predict anymore? You rely on that predictability.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I believe for our business, that hits about 6 million in ARR. If you want me to give you a spot on number, that's about to where I believe that we've proven the model to then say, okay, great. Our brand is now known. We have the inner workings, the gearing set, so to speak, to allow the flywheel to just spin. Until then,
how are you calculating intangible assets into that brand value then as well, not just the tangible assets? And you're subtracting liabilities from assets, you've got a valuation, but how do you factor in those intangibles? You're talking about brand, right? And that's interesting to me as well.
Yeah, so when we talk about brand as a new company, so this is where we don't have the historical data. So it's a great question in terms of we have to create and generate an engine that people know about. Over time, once you hit 6 million, or that's my magic number, then you've created a brand where people are telling the story for you. And so you don't have to necessarily worry about, I'll say the assets minus its liabilities, that experience, because frankly, the flywheel is spinning. And in all of our software companies, all we're looking for is the flywheel to start spinning, because then once that happens, your predictability is already there and you can start ramping by just frankly spending more money. That is what a Series B investor wants to see is, okay, show me the fact that you have track record of, let's say this is the CAC payback period, and it is consistent with what your expectation is. If I'm the new investor, I say, great, I know that this is going to now go up to 15 or 16 months because I'm gonna spend more on variable, knowing that it's gonna come down to 9 over time. That is exactly what a new investor would be doing. Hopefully that helps.
Brilliant.
Tyler, how do you manage expectations as your ad spend grows and as you're getting away from your core competency like audience? Your CAC will naturally go up and your revenue will tend to decrease. How do you manage the expectation of balancing kind of those two things as your audience grows?
And I don't know that I buy into the fact that with an increased ad spend, your effectuation is going to be lower. I think that smart ad spend is always going to have an ROI that's accretable to the company. I think people get, for lack of a better word, quote unquote, lazy in terms of where they're deploying their dollars. And because the scrappy startup is fighting for every dollar, they have to make the ROI work. Eventually they get, I'll call it fat a little bit and say, okay, great, I'm just going to start trying new things without the process of, I'm going to test and iterate for the perpetual, like for the entire life cycle of that company. And so I understand what you're asking, but I don't buy into the fact that your CAC payback period should be higher over time just because your ad spend is growing. I don't buy that. And frankly, one of my members on the team that's on the call, I won't put up for it either, truthfully. So that's just something very deliberate as a company that just we can't do, because that would be an opposite of a best in class kind of company there. But that's why we hire smart guys first and foremost.
Tyler, I'd be interested in your insights on a little more of the nuanced aspects of this and looking at the CAC payback period and mentioning my goal is to get the CAC payback period down or 12 months or 9 months as quickly as possible.
Sure.
Obviously, you know, when we look at certain variables, we know that tweaking certain levers has more impact than others. And in looking at everything, I mean, you know, what is, when you're saying, hey, we got to get this CAC payback period down to this number, what are some of the discussions that management has towards what areas they need to focus on that create, kind of what's that succession of discussions to have? Is the first one is targeting training? Is it, you know, specific ad space? Is it, you know, how do those discussions look for management in terms of where we should be focusing first that you have seen have the most impact on that number the fastest? Does that make sense?
100% does. And I will tell you that being very, very specific on who we call them hand raisers of your buyers are. That's the biggest impact that your company will have with ad spend, is to say, okay, what is the customer profile that I'm looking for first? And if we know that, then it's very easy to target them more effectively than just saying, okay, I'm going to take, and we did this because we need to create general awareness, but a billboard on I-15. That doesn't have a direct impact on whether or not we can land you as a customer, but it creates general awareness. Is it including CAC? Sure. Is it something we do periodically to create awareness? Sure. But it's not going to be something that's going to be the most effective. The other thing is to make sure that you're hiring your BDR and your AE team at the most appropriate time. And I look at that as a company swell. So you should be able to create an incredible amount of demand before you bring in your first AE. Because then at that point, you as the founder, you can't sell all the deals. And it makes sense to say, okay, now I'm going to incur more CAC because we can fuel more growth. And so some companies do it that way and say, okay, I'm going to wait until I'm overworked to then incur more cost. Others say, no, with more cost comes more revenue. And it just depends on what your sales motion looks like. How effective are your kind of top of funnel activities to get you to the conversion cycle and down to close? And I can speak to it. I'm first and foremost, I'll tell you, I'm a sales CFO. So I'm more risk taker than maybe most CFOs to say, no, let's try this because I don't know if it'll work, but it'll be cool to learn from, as opposed to most that put maybe tight strings on the purse there.
Tyler, I've got two quick questions. One is, how could someone who's more of an individual or a much smaller company where they're wearing multiple hats, how would they change this model at all? And then the second one is, how would you use data analytics and data science in the management of CAC?
Okay. First question is fairly straightforward. It would be, if I'm an entrepreneur, and you know, we were like this for a number of years, or for a year, I guess, at least. It was me and Ron were really the only two AEs really selling. Kyle, he was creating a lot of demand and helping us on that. But really, I would look at the CAC payback, or the CAC cost is frankly our three salaries, a component of it. And so then you would do what's called a cost study. You say, okay, it's about 20% of my time is out there doing this type of activity. And instead of going through an entire analysis like this, you're really just saying our total salaries for the company are $33,000 times 20% of my time is doing marketing activities. And so that's the cost that you're trying to cover, plus any direct mail or various items like that. So that's how I would simplify the model. In terms of data analytics, there's a lot of it. And this is where Kyle's tremendous at. But really, you're trying to track how many leads are generated by, let's say, a direct mailer. And then tracking that direct mailer, all of those leads in and through the funnel, to see what is your duration from marketing spend all the way through to close. Super, super critical to know which are your most effective channels for advertising. Most companies just take a shotgun approach, I'll tell you, and say, okay, I think this is going to work. We're not going to really track it. And so ultimately you're putting an entire bucket of money out there and saying, okay, great, we're going to get something back. Instead of saying, no, let's actually try this test for 3 months or for 30 days and then see what happens. And then we'll do a different test. We call them A/B testing. This is where Kyle and team are very good at saying, no, we're going to do message testing every single time we put a piece of marketing content out there. We're doing message testing. And that allows us over time to really dial into what your question was before, was to say, okay, how do you actually maximize and double down on the portions of the marketing spend that are actually working? And so the only way that you're able to do that is through effective data tracking. And I'm not the expert at that. There's all sorts of ways to create links and follow them through the funnel. We stood up Salesforce very, very early on in our company to do this, but it's an expensive spend. We just know that we have to do it because that's what changed, frankly. It taught us very early on that we're data-driven first to be able to drive the company forward. I hope that helps, Taylor.
Yeah, and in 10 seconds of how we do that is it's all in definition. And so if we define our entire sales process from an inquiry to a marketing qualified lead to an actual sales opportunity to close, and you have those breakpoints across all of those clearly defined, then it becomes pretty easy to do your message testing. And so for us, the two big that we're always testing is ease of use with our platform versus the innovation that we have on it. And so if I then have those two message tests and I'm running them through different channels, I can then see which message and which channel is driving inquiries to qualified leads to actual sales opportunities to close business. And it actually puts a score to absolutely everything in those steps there. So it all starts with that definition early on and then just maintaining your tagging along the way.
And you'll notice, and I'll send this out, one last thing in terms of this is what we look at right now. So if I had this information, you're going to see what my future state of my model is going to look like. This would be different opportunities and channels that we're going to spend money in. This is right now saying, well, we don't really know much of anything yet. What we do know is MQL to SAO is this percentage. And we know once we get it to SAO, our close rate is this percentage. And so when we start looking at an 8% conversion rate from MQL to close, now we start knowing, going all the way back to your sales model and saying, okay, how many MQLs now do I need in order to drive the revenue that we need to get the growth rate or the profitability or whatever we're looking for at that point. But it's all driven by this data here, which has to be tracked.
Well,
oh, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, we are at kind of the end of our time here. So Taylor and I kind of talked about, if you have to bounce off, feel free. But if Tyler, you're willing for another minute or two to maybe answer a few questions, I thought we keep it on since I think there's still questions coming in. If you've got a couple extra minutes of your day.
Sure, let's do it.
Cool. And if you need to hop off, feel free. Nice to meet everyone, and hopefully see you again next week. But what was your question, Stu? You were about to ask something.
Taylor, is it okay if I ask a quick question? I didn't follow the rules of channeling through you. Is that all right?
No, great. Go for it.
Cool. So, and I don't know if this is for every SaaS company, but at least for us at Zoom, I know that we have several customers that will say, I want to move forward, but we won't move forward until I see X integration or X or Y, feature put into your product that our customer or competitor has. If you can directly tie a product development efforts in feature building and integration building into customer acquisition, do you include their time and efforts into that numerator of the CAC equation, or do you continue to keep that as an operational expense?
Ooh, there's a big question. It's a good question. I would not, to be honest with you. I would look at that and say how much, and this is how we look at it here at Every, is if we delivered X product feature, how much revenue could we unlock? Not is it a customer acquisition cost, because that customer is already there.
Sure.
We're just waiting for the right product at the right time. And so we just have to then say, to me, it's not it's not a cost to deliver the right product. It's just getting the right product ready to now allow them to raise their hand and purchase. So I don't put that in terms of your CAC cost. I never put dev cost inside of CAC cost, because that is ultimately will muddy the water for a long time for you. So I keep those very separate. But we do have very different metrics for the dev shop to say, okay, great. If we can unlock certain revenue worth X dollars of value, maybe it's a prioritization discussion for us to say, no, instead of building this tool, build this tool first. So that's how it changes our company, is based upon how many people are waiting that are raising their hand. They just need one little thing more to be able to get them over the finish line.
Makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, I can scrub this down a little bit and send it to you. There's no, I created this from scratch. Truth be told, from a partner to see a CPA firm to trying to create this was, let's just say I felt like I was back in high school, thinking of something I should have learned that I didn't learn, but I hadn't touched for like 20 years. So this is actually a fun process to go through. And I actually encourage people to not necessarily adopt maybe a format that somebody else uses, but create it based upon, maybe building it knowing there's a nebulous thing out there that you can look back on. So my one recommendation is still build it from scratch necessarily, but just make sure all the data, you own it from your side there.
Cool. Tyler, you can send that to me, and I'll send a follow-up of the recording and that document once you get it scrubbed up to your liking. And I'll shoot out an email sometime before the end of the day so that everyone has that. That will also include everyone's contact information, connect with everyone on LinkedIn. We do have a LinkedIn group that I'll add everyone to. Feel free to join or not join. I know some of you were just testing the group out today. No pressure to join that group, but there's certainly opportunity there. I know Taylor wanted to shout out something he's doing cool this week, but anything else for Tyler before we wrap up?
Tyler, thanks so much. This was awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Tyler.
Certainly. Happy to help.
Michaela, I'll echo what you said, but I would impose a high level of pressure to join the LinkedIn group and to come back. So, I mean,
they're your friends. A lot of these people are your friends, so that you can do that.
Also, just as an announcement, I'm moderating another webinar. So we have a series of webinars. I'm with a specific group of companies, but I'm moderating a webinar on Thursday. It's the Road to Revenue, and Phil Case from Max Connect will be talking about digital marketing and how best to do that and generate revenue. So I'll put that link in to the chat right now. But the sponsors on that webinar are Carta, Every, Silicon Slopes, and MyInvenio. But this is the second of 4 in the webinar series. So it'll be great if you want to check it out.
Cool. And if you want to hear Tyler talk more, he's doing another webinar later this week that I can shout out in the group as well. So he's got a lot to say and good stuff. So
awesome. Yeah, throw the link in the chat.
Yeah, you're muted, Tyler. I think you were saying something.
I said this one's on the crazy PPP loan forgiveness. So if any of those you guys have applied for those, there's interesting and fun rules that are coming out every day regarding that. So anyway.
Cool. I'll send the link out. Sweet.
Last plug, Michaela. Everybody needs to fill out that form that I put in the chat at the beginning, the member form, because then we'll be able to get the right speakers on a weekly basis based on what all of you want to hear and get educated on. So this one was awesome, Tyler. Thanks so much. But everybody fill that form out, please.
All right. I'm just going to send out a couple more links. Stu, did the links go away as soon as we end the Zoom chat?
They will, but you can capture the links in the recording afterwards. So you can send them out again if you choose to.
Perfect. And I've got most of you queued up for the LinkedIn group, so look out for that. But that should be everything. And have a great rest of your day, and hopefully see everyone next week.